Your soulmate is about to die tragically, and you have the power to stop it. My beloved child. Something has shifted around your soulmate, and the strange part is that they may already feel it without understanding what it means. Lately, they have been moving through their days differently, quieter than usual, distracted at unexpected moments, almost as though an invisible clock has begun counting down. But listen carefully, because this story is not telling you that tragedy is guaranteed. It is revealing something far more mysterious. There may still be time for one small decision to completely change what happens next. Your soulmate recently ignored a feeling they could not explain. They were about to change a plan, send a message, or step away from something already arranged, but then they convinced themselves they were simply overthinking. That decision seemed ordinary. It wasn't. And somehow, you are connected to the second chance they haven't recognized yet. Don't skip, because what happens next explains why you suddenly matter more than you realize. There is one detail your soulmate has kept completely private. Earlier, they experienced a strange moment when everything around them seemed to become unusually still. Their thoughts immediately turned toward you. Not toward an argument. Not toward the past. Toward one unfinished conversation between you, the kind of conversation that keeps returning because something important was never said. They almost reached out. Their fingers hovered over your name, but hesitation stopped them. What they don't know is that reaching out could change another decision they are preparing to make. And this is where the mystery deepens. The power you have isn't supernatural, and it isn't about controlling their future. It is something surprisingly human. Your words may influence whether they reconsider a choice they have been rushing toward. Stay till the end, because there is another person who has already noticed that your soulmate isn't acting like themselves, and what that person discovered changes the entire meaning of their silence. That person asked your soulmate one simple question: why are you rushing this? Your soulmate froze. For several seconds, they couldn't answer. Then they admitted something they had told nobody else. They had been feeling an unexplained pressure to finish everything quickly, as though they were afraid time was slipping away. But when your name entered the conversation, their entire expression changed. Suddenly, they remembered a promise connected to you, something they once intended to fulfill before circumstances pulled you apart. And now they are reconsidering the very plan they refused to question before. Something huge is waiting for you, because the real turning point may not be some dramatic rescue at the final second. It may begin with information you haven't received yet. Your soulmate has prepared something specifically for you, and once you understand what it contains, you'll finally see why your response could influence their next move. But before they send it, they are waiting for one unmistakable sign. And the shocking part is that you may have already given it without realizing what you did. The sign appeared in the most ordinary way, which is exactly why your soulmate almost missed it. Something connected to you resurfaced unexpectedly, a remembered sentence, an old promise, a detail they had pushed aside, and suddenly the decision they had been rushing toward no longer felt right. They stopped. For the first time, they questioned everything. Why had they been moving so quickly? Why had they ignored that persistent feeling telling them to reconsider? And why did thinking about you create an immediate sense that they needed to change their plans? Don't skip. Your soulmate then opened the message they had prepared for you, read it from beginning to end, and deleted one sentence before rewriting it completely. That sentence contained the truth they had been afraid to admit: they didn't actually want to disappear from your life. They wanted a reason to turn around. But what happened moments later gave them something even stronger than a reason. Their phone rang, and the conversation changed the entire direction of the night. Someone close to them had learned about the plan your soulmate was preparing to follow and immediately questioned one specific detail. It was something your soulmate had overlooked because their emotions were clouding their judgment. Suddenly, the choice that had seemed certain became questionable. They were encouraged to slow down, reconsider, and stop treating an important decision as though it couldn't wait another day. Your soulmate listened silently, but one thought kept returning: you. Stay till the end, because this is where your power becomes clear. You were never meant to magically predict an event or carry responsibility for something outside your control. Your influence comes through connection. One sincere conversation, one unanswered message finally answered, one moment of honesty could remind them to stop rushing and reconsider what they truly want. And your soulmate is closer to reaching out than you think. But there is another hidden layer. After that call ended, your soulmate noticed something inside the message they had written to you, a phrase they had typed almost automatically. It said that if they could change one decision, they already knew which one it would be. They stared at those words because they suddenly understood they weren't talking about the distant past. They were talking about the choice directly in front of them. Something huge is waiting for you. Your soulmate has now delayed what they were planning, but they haven't abandoned it completely. There is still one unresolved question holding them between two paths, and strangely, they believe you are the only person who could answer it honestly. They are preparing to ask you that question. But before they do, something they kept hidden about the original plan is about to surface, and once you discover why they were rushing in the first place, everything you thought this story was about will change. What your soulmate had been hiding was not the plan itself, but the reason they felt compelled to make it so quickly. For days, they had been carrying an unsettling sense that something in their life needed to change immediately. They couldn't explain it, so they turned that feeling into action, making arrangements, closing unfinished chapters, convincing themselves that moving faster would somehow quiet the uncertainty inside them. But after delaying the decision, something unexpected happened. The pressure began to fade. And that frightened them in a completely different way, because it suggested the urgency had never been about the destination at all. It had been about something unresolved inside their heart. Don't skip. Your soulmate suddenly realized that every time they imagined moving forward without speaking to you first, something felt incomplete. So they opened your conversation again, stared at your name, and finally began typing the question they had been avoiding. The question was painfully simple: if I asked you to stay in my life, would you? They typed it. Deleted it. Typed it again. Then they placed their phone down because sending those words meant admitting how deeply your presence still mattered. But another detail surfaced before they could decide. Someone close to them revealed that your soulmate had recently mentioned you repeatedly without realizing it: your advice, something you once said, even the way you used to make them reconsider impulsive choices. That realization stopped them cold. Stay till the end, because this is where the title takes on a deeper meaning. Your power to stop it was never about carrying the impossible burden of controlling life and death. It is about becoming the interruption that makes someone slow down, think clearly, reconnect, and choose differently. And your soulmate has finally started doing exactly that. Yet one important decision remains untouched. Late that evening, they returned to the original arrangement and noticed a detail they had previously ignored. Something about the timing no longer worked. Instead of brushing away the concern, they listened to it. They postponed the plan again and decided they would not move forward until they had spoken with the people involved and understood everything clearly. That single choice changed the atmosphere completely. But then your soulmate did something nobody expected. They opened the unfinished message to you and added another line beneath the question, "There is something I should have told you a long time ago. Something huge is waiting for you, because this confession isn't simply about missing you." It explains why they began making these rushed decisions in the first place, and why, beneath all their hesitation, they have secretly been hoping you would give them one reason to choose a completely different future. The confession they had been holding back was finally becoming impossible to hide. Your soulmate wasn't rushing because they had stopped caring about you. They were rushing because caring had become overwhelming, and distance seemed easier than admitting how much remained unfinished between you. Every new plan had been an attempt to convince themselves they could simply move forward. But now, with everything delayed and their emotions finally quiet enough to hear clearly, they recognized the truth. Leaving without speaking to you would become the one decision they might always regret. They picked up their phone again. This time, they didn't delete the message. But just before sending it, another notification appeared, one connected to the plans they had postponed. Your soulmate read it twice, then immediately sat down. Something important had changed. Don't skip, because postponing that decision may have prevented them from stepping into circumstances they no longer felt comfortable with. For several minutes, they simply stared at the screen. The updated information confirmed what their instincts had been telling them: slowing down had been the right choice. Nothing supernatural had happened. No mysterious force had rewritten reality. Your soulmate had simply stopped ignoring reasonable doubts and finally given themselves enough time to think. And strangely, you were the person who had inspired that pause. They remembered how you once challenged them to think before making emotional decisions. They remembered your patience. They remembered feeling understood around you. Stay till the end. Because instead of returning to their original plan, your soulmate contacted someone they trusted, explained everything honestly, and asked for help reviewing their next steps. That conversation brought relief, but it also produced one question they couldn't escape: if thinking about you had helped them reconsider something this important, why were they still afraid to tell you how they truly felt? That question broke through the final wall. Your soulmate returned to your message and began writing without deleting anything. They admitted they had been pretending to be stronger than they felt. They admitted they had almost made a major choice without giving themselves time to think. And then came the sentence they had avoided for far too long: when everything felt uncertain, you were the person I wanted to talk to. But they still didn't press send. Something huge is waiting for you, because there was one final truth they wanted to include, something connected to the promise they remembered earlier. They searched through something they had kept for a long time and found exactly what they were looking for. The moment they saw it, their hesitation disappeared. Your soulmate now knew what they needed to say to you. And the object they had just found revealed that this unfinished connection between you began much earlier than you realize. What your soulmate found was small enough to fit in their hand, yet it carried the weight of an entire unfinished chapter. It was something connected to a moment when the two of you had spoken about the future without realizing how important those words would eventually become. Your soulmate had kept it even during the times they tried convincing themselves they were finished with the past. Seeing it again brought back one sentence you had once said about never making permanent decisions from temporary emotions. Suddenly, everything clicked. Their recent urgency. Their silence. Their attempt to move forward without looking back. They had been doing exactly what those words warned against. Don't skip, because instead of simply becoming emotional, your soulmate made a practical decision. They canceled another unnecessary commitment, gave themselves space to think, and decided that nothing important would happen until they had clear information and a calm mind. Then came the moment they had avoided all night. Your soulmate opened the message to you and finally pressed send. No dramatic speech. No carefully polished explanation. Just honesty. They told you they had been making decisions too quickly. They admitted something had made them reconsider. And then they asked the question that had been sitting inside them for longer than they wanted to admit: can we talk before I decide what happens next? The second the message left their screen, your soulmate felt something unexpected, not fear, but relief. Stay till the end, because sending that message changed another decision almost immediately. Instead of going forward alone, they reached out to someone trustworthy and asked them to stay involved while they sorted everything out. For the first time in days, your soulmate wasn't rushing toward uncertainty. They were slowing down, asking questions, and giving themselves options. But one mystery remained: why had they waited until this exact moment to involve you? The answer appeared when they looked again at the object they had found. Attached to it was something they had forgotten completely, a few words they themselves had written long ago. Those words reminded them of a promise. If life ever became confusing enough that they couldn't recognize themselves, they would speak to the person who knew the version of them that existed before fear started making their choices. That person was you. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate now understands that your role isn't to carry responsibility for their fate. Your role is simply to be honest if that conversation reaches you, while they take responsible steps for their own well-being and decisions. But moments after sending the message, they received a response from someone else involved in their original plans. It contained one unexpected piece of information, and after reading it, your soulmate whispered 6 words that changed everything: I was never supposed to rush. Those 6 words stayed with your soulmate because the new information revealed something they had completely misunderstood. The plan they believed had to happen immediately had never required that kind of urgency. Somewhere along the way, pressure, emotion, and assumptions had blended together until your soulmate started treating every hour like a deadline. Now they could finally see it. They had options. They could wait. They could ask questions. They could choose differently. And the moment that truth settled in, their thoughts returned to the message they had just sent you. Don't skip. Because your soulmate suddenly realized that asking to speak with you wasn't a final goodbye. It was the first truly clear decision they had made in days. But before they could fully process that realization, their phone lit up again. This time, what appeared on the screen made them stop completely. It wasn't the answer they had been expecting from you. Instead, someone they trusted had sent them a reminder about an earlier conversation, including one detail your soulmate had forgotten. Days before all this began, they had admitted feeling exhausted from making important choices alone. They had even said they wished someone would simply tell them it was acceptable to slow down. Reading those words now felt almost unbelievable. The answer had been sitting in front of them before the crisis of uncertainty ever started. Stay till the end, because this changed their next move. Your soulmate stopped everything for the evening. They made sure the people close to them knew what was happening, stepped away from unnecessary pressure, and promised themselves they would make no major decision until they felt calm and informed. Then they looked toward your unanswered conversation again, and noticed something about their own message that revealed what they truly wanted from you. They hadn't asked you to rescue them. They hadn't asked you to decide their future. They had asked for a conversation. That difference suddenly mattered more than anything. Your soulmate understood that whatever happened next had to remain their responsibility, but hearing your perspective could remind them of something they had lost while rushing: clarity. Something huge is waiting for you, because just as they reached that realization, the status beneath their message changed. Their words had reached you. Your soulmate stared at the screen, unsure whether an answer would come quickly or whether they would have to wait. But then another realization hit them: there was still one part of the truth they hadn't told you. If you responded, they would finally have to explain what originally triggered this entire chain of decisions. And that secret wasn't about where they were planning to go. It was about something they had discovered about themselves only days earlier. The discovery your soulmate made about themselves was quieter than anyone would expect, but it changed the meaning of everything. They realized they had developed a habit of running whenever life became emotionally overwhelming, not physically running from one place to another, but filling every uncertain moment with another decision, another commitment, another reason not to sit with what they truly felt. And this time, that pattern had nearly pushed them into making a choice they didn't genuinely want. Your soulmate finally admitted something difficult: the urgency had been coming from fear, not clarity. The moment they understood that, they stopped treating their original plan like an unavoidable destination. Don't skip, because their next realization was even more personal. Every time they had imagined slowing down and facing their feelings honestly, one person kept appearing in their thoughts. You. Not because you could magically solve their life, but because you represented the conversation they had avoided longer than any other. Then your soulmate noticed something unexpected about the message they had sent you. They had written, "Can we talk before I decide what happens next?" But now they understood they didn't actually need your permission to slow down. They had already chosen to. That realization gave them a kind of strength they hadn't felt throughout this entire situation. They contacted the people involved, clearly explained that they needed more time, and refused to let outside pressure make the decision for them. Stay till the end, because this is where the story turns again. Once your soulmate removed the artificial deadline, new information started surfacing. One person admitted there had been a misunderstanding about the timing. Another confirmed that waiting was completely possible. Suddenly, the frightening countdown your soulmate had built inside their mind disappeared. Yet instead of forgetting you and returning to normal, they became even more determined to tell you the truth. Because now there was nothing left to hide behind. No deadline. No pressure. That sentence carried the truth your soulmate had spent all this time trying not to face. I always thought that when I finally became ready for the life I wanted, I would come back and find you still somewhere in it. They stared at those words after sending them, realizing how much they had revealed. The forgotten object wasn't simply a reminder of the past. It represented a private plan they had once made after one of your deepest conversations. They had imagined returning when they were calmer, stronger, and capable of choosing you without hesitation. But somewhere along the way, waiting became distance, distance became silence, and silence convinced them they had already lost their chance. Don't skip. Because that belief was exactly what triggered their recent rush. They weren't racing towards something they wanted. They were racing away from the possibility that the future they truly wanted had already disappeared. Once they recognized that, their entire perspective changed. The frightening urgency that had surrounded the original plan no longer controlled them. They had postponed it, spoken with people they trusted, corrected the misunderstanding about the timing, and given themselves room to think clearly. But now came the harder part, accepting that slowing down didn't automatically repair everything between you. Your response mattered emotionally, but your soulmate understood they couldn't place responsibility for their choices on your shoulders. Stay till the end, because this realization made their next decision surprisingly mature. Instead of staring endlessly at the phone, they stepped away and began rebuilding the parts of their own life they had neglected while making rushed decisions. They organized what needed attention. They asked for support where they needed it. And they made one promise to themselves: whatever happened between you, they would never again mistake emotional pressure for a reason to gamble with an important decision. Hours later, your soulmate returned to the conversation. The atmosphere felt different now. They weren't waiting for you to rescue them. They were waiting because, after all the silence between you, they genuinely wanted to know whether an honest conversation was still possible. Something huge is waiting for you. They opened the message containing their confession and noticed that the most vulnerable sentence was no longer the one about finding you in their future. It was a sentence near the very end, one they had written almost without thinking. It said, "If there is still a door between us, I won't ask you to open it for me. Just tell me whether it's still there." Your soulmate read those words slowly. And then something happened on the screen that they had been hoping for since this entire night began. But what came next wasn't the simple answer they expected. It raised a completely new question about what the two of you were supposed to do now. The answer that appeared did not give your soulmate an easy yes or no. Instead, it forced them to confront the one thing they had avoided throughout this entire journey: words alone would never be enough. Whatever possibility remained between you would have to be approached slowly, honestly, and without turning emotion into another rushed decision. Your soulmate read the response again and felt something inside them settle. They weren't being handed a perfect ending. They were being given something more meaningful, a chance to have the conversation they had been afraid to begin. Don't skip. Because their immediate reaction revealed how much they had changed. They didn't start making new plans. They didn't promise impossible things. They simply replied, "Then I want to do this differently." And for the first time, those words weren't driven by fear of losing you. They came from the realization that a future worth having could not be built through panic. But there was still unfinished business surrounding the decision that started everything. Your soulmate knew postponing it was only the first step. So before allowing emotions to carry them somewhere new, they returned to the people they trusted and carefully reviewed what had happened. The misunderstanding about timing was cleared up. The pressure that had seemed unavoidable was gone. And most importantly, your soulmate made sure they were no longer facing important choices alone. Stay till the end, because this is when they finally understood what your power in this story truly represented. You were never responsible for controlling their fate. Your presence had simply reminded them of the person they wanted to become, someone who pauses, asks questions, seeks support, and refuses to let fear make permanent choices. Yet even after everything became calmer, one final mystery remained. Why had that old promise resurfaced at exactly the moment they needed to remember it? Your soulmate returned to the object one last time and discovered something on the back they hadn't noticed earlier. A date. Not a mysterious prediction. Not a warning. Just the date when the two of you had made that promise to choose clarity over fear whenever life became overwhelming. Your soulmate smiled because suddenly the meaning was obvious. They had kept that reminder for a reason, even when they had forgotten the reason itself. Something huge is waiting for you, because now they were ready to honor the promise in a completely different way. They weren't going to run toward you or away from you. They were going to meet the future carefully, one honest decision at a time. Then another message entered the conversation, one that turned their attention away from the past completely. It contained a simple question about meeting face to face, and your soulmate knew their answer immediately. But before replying, they realized there was one last truth you deserved to hear first. The message changed the entire emotional weight of what your soulmate thought was coming next. Until that moment, they believed the meeting would mostly be about their confession, their silence, their rushed choices, their realization that fear had been controlling too much of their life. But now they understood there had always been another side to the unfinished story. Something connected to that old promise had remained unspoken between you, and suddenly your soulmate wasn't preparing to explain everything. They were preparing to listen. That distinction mattered. They read the message slowly, then placed their phone down rather than reacting immediately. Don't skip. The person who had been racing against an imaginary clock was now choosing patience even when every emotion inside them wanted answers. And strangely, that patience brought another realization. Whatever had nearly pushed them into that rushed decision was losing its power over them. The future no longer felt like something they had to escape. It felt like something they could finally choose carefully. Your soulmate eventually replied with only a few words, "Tell me when you're ready." No pressure. No demand for immediate answers. No attempt to force the connection into the ending they secretly wanted. Then they did something equally important. They confirmed that the original plan would remain postponed while they continued sorting everything out with people they trusted. Stay till the end, because this was the moment they finally separated two things they had accidentally tangled together, their personal well-being and their relationship with you. They understood that reconnecting with you could be meaningful, but their safety, judgment, and major life choices could never depend entirely on another person's response. That realization made the possibility of meeting you feel healthier and more genuine. They weren't coming toward you because they needed saving. They were coming because, after removing the panic and pressure, they still wanted you in the conversation. And that answer surprised them more than anything else. But just when everything seemed to be settling, your soulmate remembered one final detail about the night the old promise was made. There had been a second promise. One neither of you had written down. Something huge is waiting for you. Your soulmate could suddenly hear those words almost perfectly in their memory. If either of you ever returned after a long silence, there would be one question that had to be answered before anything could begin again. Not, "Do you still love me?" Not, "Why did you leave?" The real question was much deeper, because it would reveal whether either of you had truly changed during the distance. Your soulmate stared at the unsent meeting message and realized they already knew their own answer. But they had no idea what yours would be. And now that meeting had become about far more than reconnecting, because the question waiting between you could determine whether this unfinished story belonged in the past, or whether both of you were finally ready to write its next chapter. The question returned to your soulmate with startling clarity. If we found each other again, would we choose differently, or simply repeat what separated us? That was the promise hidden beneath all the others. Neither of you wanted another beginning built on the same silence, assumptions, and unspoken feelings. Your soulmate sat with that question longer than expected, because answering it required more than saying they had changed. They had to look at what they had actually done differently during these last few hours. They had slowed down, asked for help, corrected misunderstandings, refused to make an important choice under emotional pressure. And instead of disappearing when vulnerability became uncomfortable, they had finally spoken honestly to you. Don't skip. Because that realization gave them the confidence to send the meeting message, but they added one unexpected sentence: "I don't want to return to what we were. I want to discover whether we can become something healthier than that." Once those words were sent, there was no hiding behind nostalgia anymore. Your soulmate expected nervousness afterward, but what came instead was an unfamiliar calm. The original plan that had once felt like an unavoidable countdown now seemed distant. They continued handling it responsibly with trusted people, but emotionally, something fundamental had shifted. They no longer believed one dramatic decision would fix everything. Stay till the end, because that change became important when another update arrived about the situation they had postponed. The people involved offered alternatives your soulmate hadn't known existed. Different timing, different arrangements, more room to reconsider. Had they continued rushing, they might never have discovered those options. Your soulmate stared at the choices and quietly realized how differently everything looked when fear wasn't making the decisions. Yet one option immediately caught their attention. It would give them enough time to have that face-to-face conversation with you before making any major commitment. For the first time, they didn't choose instantly. They waited, reviewed everything carefully, and asked themselves whether the decision would still feel right even if the meeting didn't go the way they hoped. That question proved how much had changed. Your soulmate understood their future could not depend on receiving a particular answer from you. They needed to make choices they could stand behind regardless. And once they accepted that, the upcoming conversation became something beautiful instead of frightening, two people meeting without demanding that the other repair the past. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate then remembered another detail about that second promise. There was supposed to be a sign that both people were genuinely ready before the question was ever asked. Not a mystical sign. A behavior. Whoever returned first had to arrive without excuses and admit one thing they personally would do differently. Your soulmate already knew their answer: I will speak before silence becomes distance. But then another message appeared, and its wording stunned them. Without knowing what your soulmate had just remembered, the message contained almost the exact same idea, and suddenly they wondered whether you had remembered the second promise too. The possibility that you remembered the second promise changed something inside your soulmate immediately. Until now, they had assumed they were the only one carrying those old words into the present, but the message suggested otherwise. It didn't promise reconciliation. It didn't erase the distance. It simply acknowledged that silence had been allowed to speak for both of you for far too long. Your soulmate read it again and felt the strange calm deepen. Don't skip. Because instead of responding with another emotional confession, they wrote something surprisingly simple: then this time, neither of us should guess what the other person means. That sentence became the foundation for what happened next. A meeting was arranged. Not rushed, not treated like a final chance, but chosen carefully. And as soon as the details were settled, your soulmate noticed something remarkable. The panic that had once made every decision feel urgent was gone. The original situation still required attention, but now they were approaching it with support, patience, and clear information rather than fear. As the meeting drew closer, your soulmate began preparing for it in a way they never would have before. They weren't rehearsing perfect lines or imagining some cinematic reunion. They wrote down the things they needed to take responsibility for. The moments when they withdrew instead of speaking. The assumptions they made without asking you what you actually felt. The times they confused protecting themselves with protecting the connection. Stay till the end, because one item on that list stopped them completely: tell them what really happened after the promise. Until now, your soulmate had explained their emotional pattern, but not the specific moment that caused them to pull away. There had been one conversation, one misunderstood detail, that convinced them you would eventually be happier without them. They never verified it. They simply believed it, stepped backward, and allowed distance to grow. Now they realized that assumption may have shaped everything that followed, including the rushed decision that began this entire story. Then, shortly before the meeting, your soulmate received information that finally settled the original situation. There was no need for panic. No reason to treat the future like a countdown. The responsible options were clear, and trusted people remained involved. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate should have felt only relief, but instead, they immediately thought about that old misunderstanding. Without the crisis distracting them anymore, there was nowhere left to hide from the truth. They opened the conversation from long ago and searched until they found the exact exchange that had changed everything. And there it was. One sentence from you that they had interpreted in the most painful possible way. But reading it now, with calmer eyes and everything they had learned, your soulmate suddenly saw another meaning. One so obvious that they whispered, "What if I misunderstood them all along?" And if they did, Then years of silence may have grown from something that was never true in the first place. The sentence looked completely different now. Years ago, your soulmate had read it through fear, and fear supplied its own meaning. They believed you were preparing to move forward without them, so instead of asking what you meant, they quietly withdrew first. But reading the entire conversation again revealed something they had overlooked. Your next words had actually invited them to be honest. You had left room for a conversation. Your soulmate simply never entered it. That realization hit harder than any dramatic revelation could. Don't skip. Because they weren't angry with you anymore, and they weren't even angry with themselves. They were stunned by how one assumption had quietly influenced everything afterward. The distance. The unfinished promise. Their habit of disappearing when emotions became complicated. Even the recent rush to make another major decision had followed the same pattern: act quickly before uncertainty has the chance to hurt. But this time, they had finally interrupted it. When the day of the meeting arrived, your soulmate carried no grand speech. They carried that old conversation and one question they had promised themselves they would finally ask. Before leaving, they checked once more that the situation which started all of this remained handled responsibly. The pressure was gone. Trusted people knew what was happening. Nothing depended on this meeting except the truth between two people. Stay till the end, because that distinction gave your soulmate the courage they had been missing for years. When they finally saw you, their first instinct was to explain everything at once, but they stopped themselves. They remembered the second promise. Listen before assuming. Speak before silence becomes distance. So they looked at you and said, "There is something I thought you meant years ago, and I need to know whether I was wrong." Then they showed you the sentence that had quietly changed the direction of both your lives. For a moment, neither of you rushed to fill the silence. Your soulmate watched your expression and realized this was the exact kind of moment they once would have escaped. Now they stayed. Something huge is waiting for you, because the answer to that old misunderstanding could completely rewrite what your soulmate believed about the past, but even more importantly, it could determine how both of you approached the future. They explained what they had thought your words meant. They admitted they had never asked. And then, instead of defending their interpretation, they gave you room to tell your side. Your soulmate was finally doing what they should have done years ago. But just before the answer came, you revealed there had been another message after that conversation, one your soulmate apparently never saw. They froze. Because if that message said what your expression suggested it did, then the separation between you may have begun with a truth that never reached them. The missing message changed the room before your soulmate even knew what it said. For years, they had carried one version of the past as though it were unquestionable. You were ready to let go, so they stepped away before hearing it directly. But now there was evidence that the story had continued after the point where their memory ended. You explained that another message had been sent, not to pressure them, not to make some dramatic promise, but to clarify the exact sentence they had misunderstood. Your soulmate listened without interrupting. Don't skip. Because what they heard next dismantled the belief that had shaped years of distance. You had never been telling them to disappear from your future. You had been saying you couldn't keep guessing what they wanted. You needed honesty. You needed clarity. And when no answer came, you eventually assumed their silence was the answer. Suddenly, your soulmate realized both of you had been standing on opposite sides of the same misunderstanding, each believing the other had chosen distance first. Your soulmate lowered their eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the simplicity of it. There had been no grand betrayal hiding underneath the separation. No single person deliberately closing the door. Just two people protecting themselves through silence until silence became a story neither questioned. Stay till the end, because instead of allowing regret to consume the meeting, you're so